and welcome to the SNN.Network Summer Virtual Event. Our next presenting company is VolitionRx. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Scott Powell, Head of IR and U.S. CFO of VolitionRx. Sir, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to SNN for having VolitionRx Limited present during today's conference. Thank you all for dialing in for our presentation today. Our company is VolitionRx Limited, and as you can see from the next slide, I would like to point you to our forward-looking statements and disclaimer. I will be making some forward-looking statements on today's call, so which may or may not be realized, so I do point you to this disclaimer. A little bit about Volition. I would like to point you to this slide. You can see our four pillars, Nu-Q, Nu-Q-Vet, Nu-Q-Nets, and Nu-Q-Capture. Nu-Q is an acronym for nucleosome quantification. Nucleosomes are the building blocks or component parts of the human chromosome. Our four pillars are Nu-Q, which is our human health oncology programs, where in advanced clinical stage in most of our programs in human oncology, we are developing blood tests, ideally to screen for lung cancer. We have studies underway at National Taiwan University in Taipei, Taiwan. In colorectal cancer, we have studies underway also at National Taiwan University in Taipei, Taiwan, also with the National Cancer Institute in the United States. And we have announced publicly that we'll be launching commencing enrollment for two studies in bloodborne cancers, looking at a variety of subtypes of leukemia and lymphoma in the United States. Enrollment expected to begin later this year. Nu-Q-Vet is our animal health program. This is commercial stage. We launched this product in November of 2020 in collaboration with Texas A&M University. It is currently a blood test to screen for two common canine cancers. And Nu-Q-Nets is our first real movement into looking at non-oncology disease states. With NETs, we're looking at patients who have been infected with either COVID-19 or sepsis, and seeing if our technology can predict which of those patients are in most need of hospital and medical resources. And so we're looking at a prognostic capability of a Nu-Q-Net. I'll talk about each of these programs in more detail later. Nu-Q-Capture is really our R&D division, and within Nu-Q-Capture, we have patents that we filed, a number of innovative and fairly amazing breakthroughs in biology that we've been able to achieve through this division. We've been able to achieve breakthroughs, and we've been able to do things in biology that weren't possible just a number of years ago. In terms of our patent protection, we have 10 U.S. patents now granted. We have 14 patents granted in the EU. We have 47 other patents granted globally, and we have just under 90 patents pending. We have very strong intellectual property protection, and most of our core IP has already been granted. Turning to our first commercial product, which is the Nu-Q-Vet cancer screening test. This product, as I mentioned, was launched in collaboration with Texas A&M University in November of 2020. In 2019, we granted Texas A&M University a 12.5% equity ownership stake in our wholly owned subsidiary, Volition Veterinary Diagnostics Development, LLC. In return for granting them a 12.5% equity ownership stake, they ran a series of clinical studies to determine the efficacy of our blood test in screening for a variety of canine cancers. The best results were in canine lymphoma and hemangiosarcoma. You can see the results here on the slide. For canine lymphoma, our studies at Texas A&M University achieved an area under the curve of 87.3%. Breaking that out into sensitivity and specificity, sensitivity being your false negative rate, specificity your false positive rate, we achieved 77% sensitivity, which means we accurately identified, i.e. the test came back positive 77% of the time for canines that were confirmed to have canine lymphoma. So fairly accurate test, especially for a blood test. specificity, 97% specificity, means that 97% of the negatives were true negatives. So we only had 3% false positive rate. Looking at hemangiosarcoma, the results were even more spectacular. We achieved an area under the curve of over 97%. Breaking that out into sensitivity and specificity, we accurately identified 82% of canines with hemangiosarcoma with only a 3% false positive rate. So again, very impressive results in these two studies. By way of comparison, there are very few blood tests that are either approved by the FDA or in common use as screens for either human or animal cancer types. Really the only one that's approved and in common use as a frontline screen for any cancer type that's a blood-based modality is the PSA test, which of course is the prostate cancer test for men. That test on its own generally achieves, depending on the clinical data, generally achieves sensitivity and specificity in the 60s or low 70s for each sensitivity and specificity. Yet that's a very commonly administered blood test. There are other blood tests that are not approved as screens for various cancers, but tend to be used anyway, sort of off-label by doctors. Think CEA for colorectal cancer, think CA19-9 for pancreatic cancer, think CA125, which is for ovarian cancer. None of these blood tests are approved as screens for these cancer types, but they're very commonly used off-label as screens. The reason they haven't been approved is because of their sensitivity and specificity, which again tends to be in the 60s or low 70s for both sensitivity and specificity. So the false negative rate is just too high at around 30-35%, and the false positive rate is just too high at around 30-35%. So the results here, where we're achieving sensitivities in the high 70s, low 80s, and specificities approaching 100%, are very, very impressive for a blood test. In terms of the market opportunity, you can see from this slide, it's a significant opportunity for Volition. 38% of U.S. households own a canine. There are 77 million canines in the U.S. alone, and 20 million canines are age 7 and older. And very importantly, 83% of canines visit a vet at least once per year. 3/4 of those visits are for wellness checks, so for routine or preventative care. Our blood tests can be positioned in several ways, but there are two primary ways that our tests can be positioned. One is on the symptomatic side of the equation. So if your canine has been, for instance, sick for a couple weeks, perhaps it hasn't been eating, perhaps it's lost weight, perhaps it has pockets of inflammation, perhaps it has lesions on its skin or growth on its chin or face, perhaps it has rectal bleeding, perhaps it's been vomiting. These are all symptoms that could be associated with a canine cancer, but they could also be caused by inflammation or infection in some cases. The vets have a really hard time differentiating the causal factor and ruling in or ruling out cancer. So a simple blood test that could provide an important piece of information, a positive or negative result with regard to a specific cancer type, on that first symptomatic visit would be very beneficial information to both canine owner and the veterinarian, because if it comes back positive for a particular canine cancer, lymphoma or hemangiosarcoma in this case, then the vets would know that the canine likely has cancer, would proceed to more definitive diagnostic tests to confirm the cancer and confirm the stage of cancer, and then begin a therapeutic treatment if that were an option. So it's more information, it's a faster diagnosis, it's a faster path to begin therapeutic treatment. So I'm sure you can all see the utility to being able to rule in or rule out cancer on that first sick visit, because what happens currently is on that first sick visit, there's often not a definitive diagnosis completed. So often there's some baseline blood work that's done, some basic blood tests that the veterinarian might order, and then sort of just a look and feel of the canine to try and determine what's causing these symptoms without really a definitive diagnosis. Oftentimes you're sent home with some medicine to put into your dog food and hope that the canine gets better over the next few weeks. Oftentimes the canine does not get better, and you're back at the vet's office 2 or 3 weeks later, or for several subsequent follow-up sick visits. And at that point, the veterinarian may decide to order some more invasive diagnostic tests. They may include biopsy of a particular part of the animal. They may include scans, so x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, and so forth. They might include surgical procedures to open up different parts of the animal's body. Obviously, these are all very expensive diagnostic tests. They're more fishing than anything else. They present some risk to the canine, of course, because there's a risk of infection due to a biopsy or surgical procedure. The animals generally have to be administered anesthesia because they don't know that they're supposed to sit still for a surgical procedure or an x-ray. So obviously there are also adverse events that sometimes occur during the administration of anesthesia. So the ability to run a simple blood test like Volition's at that first sick visit will be incredibly useful to these veterinarians in terms of a faster diagnosis, and then if it is a cancer type, a faster path to beginning therapeutic treatment. On the other side of the equation, it gets really interesting as well, would be to position our blood test as a screen for asymptomatic canines as part of their annual or semi-annual wellness check. And that's a very interesting way to position our test. So as you can see from the slide, there are 20 million canines aged 7 and older. 7 is the year at which canines become more predisposed to developing cancer. Just like in humans, we don't screen for colorectal cancer until a person in the United States turns age 45. We don't screen for prostate cancer until age 50, on the asymptomatic side. With canines, there's really no asymptomatic screening currently being done for cancers in canines. It's very similar to human health. Many times we don't go to the doctor, we don't get various tests until we're sick. It's the same with canines. You can see the statistic here on the circle on the left. There are 6 million canines diagnosed with cancer in the U.S. annually each year. The vast majority of those 6 million diagnoses are because the canine is symptomatic. Like, there are very few cancer diagnoses of canines on the asymptomatic side. We just don't have tools or the ability to screen canines asymptomatically based upon age until now. So we're really excited about this opportunity because now a canine, upon turning age 7, when it goes in for its annual or semi-annual wellness check, the veterinarian could simply order a Volition blood test to screen for these 2 cancer types if your canine is predisposed to one of these 2 cancer types. And we announced on our earnings call last week that we're expanding to up to 7 canine cancers. So we're looking at an additional 5 canine cancers to see if we can screen for additional cancers. Right now, hemangiosarcoma and canine lymphoma account for about 1/3 of all canine cancer cases. With the addition of the other 5 canine cancers, we hope that our test will be able to screen for the majority of canine cancers. So really excited about the expansion into other canine cancers. The market, as you can see, is substantial. Our cost of goods is under $5. We're contractually obligated to sell to Texas A&M University for $45. They resell to veterinarians for $122. And we're seeing vets sell to the general public for anywhere from $199 to $299. So there's a significant margin at all points in the supply chain. It's a $40 gross profit to Volition, and about a 90% gross margin. So it's a very attractive and lucrative potential opportunity for us. You can do the math with 77 million canines. If we sell 100,000 tests per year, it's $4.5 million in revenue to Volition. If we sell 1 million tests per year, it's $45 million in revenue to Volition, and you can do the math from there on out. Also, on last week's earnings call, we announced that we are in advanced discussions with 1 or more large animal health diagnostics companies in the United States about a potential licensing deal, so a potential opportunity to license this blood test to one of the major animal health diagnostics companies. So really excited about that opportunity. That is our preferred method to generate increased sales of this blood test. So obviously we will obviously make public announcements if and when we do sign a final licensing deal with one of these major companies. So that would really be a game changer for Volition in terms of our ability to penetrate the U.S. market with this blood test. So we're excited about this opportunity for these reasons. Turning next to our program that for the first time is not looking at oncology-based disease states. NUQ-NETs is our first foray into looking at patients who have been infected with either COVID-19 or sepsis. And this next slide does a good job explaining NETs, which is an acronym for neutrophil extracellular traps. And NETs are one of the body's first defense mechanisms or immune responses to infection. And NETs are made up of chromatin material, and our H3.1 assay measures quantitatively the amount of chromatin material in a person's bloodstream. What we see with COVID-19 infections and also with sepsis infections is that when a person's infected with one of these two diseases, their white blood cells inject NETs into a person's bloodstream. And you can see a nice diagram here on slide 18 that green material is a nice diagram of NETs. It acts like a net or a spider web, and what its job is to try and envelop and neutralize the invading pathogen or disease to kill it and to prevent it from spreading throughout other parts of the body. For reasons unknown, in certain persons, the body goes into overdrive. You may have heard of the cytokine storm, which is what ends up killing people in COVID-19 and in sepsis. So it's actually not COVID-19 that ends up killing a patient. It's the cytokine storm or the hyperimmune response in certain patients that occurs. And what happens is, for some reason, the body misregulates its injection of NETs into your bloodstream, and it keeps injecting high levels of NETs into the bloodstream over and above what's necessary. And because these NETs act as neutralizing agents, the overinjection of NETs serves to actually poison your own body. It ends up preventing certain organs from functioning properly, and in the case of COVID-19, it actually causes a significant buildup of fluid in a person's lungs, and that's what causes the oxygenation issues, and ultimately what causes a person to ultimately suffocate and die from their own fluid in their lungs. What's interesting about our technology is we discovered last summer by looking at COVID-19 patients, and then we announced 2 weeks ago through a press release, we're able to quantitatively measure the amount of NETs in a person's bloodstream, and we're seeing a direct correlation between the amount of NETs in a person's bloodstream and the severity of symptoms a patient suffers from COVID-19 infection or sepsis infection. So we think we may have a prognostic tool or capability here. What I mean by that is we hope that once a person is confirmed infected by either COVID-19 or sepsis, they would then be administered a Volition blood test. And if the blood test comes back and quantitatively measures a significant amount of NETs that have been injected into a person's bloodstream, we know that that person is in need of medical resources and hospitalization. The key question that we have not answered yet, and we've announced publicly we plan to run longitudinal studies to answer this question, is how far in advance of the suffering of severe symptoms from infection of COVID-19 or sepsis does it occur after injection of NETs into a person's bloodstream. So in other words, if the injection of NETs occurs simultaneously with a person suffering severe symptoms of COVID-19 or sepsis infection, we don't have the ability to triage that patient or to perform a risk stratification analysis. However, if NETs get injected into a person's bloodstream and then the body goes into a hyperimmune response, say 12, 24, 36, 48, 72 hours post-injection, then we have a potential ability to provide a prognostic tool or a risk stratification tool, because if we can see through our blood test that the body's injected a significant amount of NETs into a person's bloodstream, yet that person is not yet experiencing the severe symptoms, that patient could be immediately given hospital or medical resources so that when the severe symptoms start to occur, that patient may already be in a hospital bed may already have been administered antibodies, if it's a bacterial infection like sepsis, may have oxygen or ventilator nearby and ready for that patient when he or she is going to experience those severe symptoms. That's the key question that we haven't answered. We'll have additional data on that question once we complete longitudinal studies over the coming quarter. So really excited about our NETosis program. And then finally, I'll just talk very briefly about our program in human oncology. And here you can see cancer in humans. And moving to slide 25, you can see that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we have programs in colorectal cancer, blood-borne cancers, and lung cancer. These are all incredibly significant opportunities for us. With colorectal cancer, the problem is that it's not that we lack a good diagnostic test. We have a very accurate test in the colonoscopy. The problem is one of compliance. People don't go in for their colonoscopy in a timely fashion, and some people never get a colonoscopy. That's a problem because colorectal cancer is a very slow-growing cancer, and it's also asymptomatic in the early stages. So if a person isn't getting screened through a colonoscopy or through a fecal test, and they have colorectal cancer, it's growing unnoticed in most cases. It's a modality problem because people don't like colonoscopies or fecal tests. A blood test, like one from Volition, obviates and deals with that particular compliance issue because it's a preferred modality. A person may refuse to do a fecal test or may refuse to do a colonoscopy, but he or she probably would not refuse a blood test if there were an accurate, inexpensive one available to them, like one from Volition that we hope to develop in the future. Lung cancer is a different problem. The primary screen for lung cancer is a CAT scan, and then the doctors have to interpret the image from the CAT scan and determine whether or not the patient should go on for a lung biopsy. 15% of the time, a lung biopsy causes a collapsed lung. So being able to insert a Volition blood test after a CAT scan and before the lung biopsy as sort of a gatekeeper test would be a very useful piece of information to have, because if a doctor sees some suspicious nodules that they think are malignant, he or she may want the patient to progress to a lung biopsy. But as a second check, they could run a simple Volition blood test, and if it comes back positive for lung cancer, then both patient and doctor are very comfortable putting that patient on for the lung biopsy and the associated risk. Blood-borne cancers, it's a new program for us. The symptoms are not very specific, so a simple blood test to rule in or rule out leukemia or lymphoma and some of the subtypes will be very useful in terms of catching blood-borne cancers early. So for colorectal, we would be pursuing a PMA pathway with the FDA, because that would be a frontline test. With both a blood test for blood-borne cancers and lung cancer, that would be a 510K pathway, because that would be positioned as a companion or an adjunct test. And these are all incredibly large markets. Lung cancer is the deadliest cancer. Colorectal cancer is often the second or third leading cause of cancer-related death in most countries. And then just to wrap up, I'll turn to slide 28. We're listed on the NYSE Stock Exchange, the NYSE American, ticker VNRX. Market cap's hovered between 150 and 250 million. We finished the end of Q2 with about 28 million in cash, very strong cash position. Cap structure is very clean. There's about 50 million shares outstanding, basic, and about 55 million shares fully diluted. The delta is all stock options for management, so we have a very clean cap structure. We have no warrants on the cap table. We have no convertible debt, no preferred shares, no convertible preferred, no equity lines. Insider ownership is strong at 17.5%. Institutions have about 33% of the shares. We have 5 analysts covering the company: Cantor Fitzgerald, Maxim Group, The Benchmark Company, Aegis Capital, and Zacks. And with that, I'll point you to our website and open it up for any questions that the audience may have. Volition.com is our website. Please feel free to go to our website, sign up for press release distribution, and so that you can stay informed as we have a variety of developments over the coming quarters and years. So I'll pause here. Sorry for speaking so fast, just a lot of information to cover. First question is, looking at the competitive landscape, are there bigger players that VNRX aspires to be? Certainly, it's a good question. Certainly, there's a lot of opportunity for Volition. We have opportunities in NETosis to try and risk stratify patients with COVID-19 or sepsis. That's a huge market. Sepsis is the #1 killer of patients in hospitals. It's a bacterial infection, and So that's a huge opportunity for us. On the animal health side, a potential licensing deal on the horizon, that could be a huge opportunity for us as well. And then, as I mentioned, on the human health side, colorectal cancer and lung cancer tend to be the two leading causes of cancer-related death. There are 150 million Europeans of screening age for colorectal cancer, over 120 million Americans of screening age for colorectal cancer. So these are huge opportunities. Any success in any one of these verticals could lead us to be a very valuable public company. So we're really excited about these opportunities, and certainly we aspire to be a very well-known company that can generate good returns for our shareholders, but also do a lot of good for humanity by introducing a suite of blood tests, which is a preferred modality to screen for a variety of cancers in humans and animals, and to screen for other diseases in humans. So really excited about the opportunity here. Let me see if there are other questions. Next question, what is the best email to contact you for questions? Good question. My email address is s.powell, so s.powell@volition.com. My email address and phone number are on Volition's website, volition.com, and also at the bottom of our press releases. I think those are all the questions. So I thank you all so much for listening to the VolitionRx Limited presentation today. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and please continue to follow the Volition story. Thank you and goodbye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the VolitionRx presentation. Thank you for joining us. You may now disconnect.